Support comes from
Entergy provides much more than power. We support science and engineering at local schools to build a brighter path to better jobs and help prepare the next generation. Because together, we power life. Entergy.
additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.
What makes this special session different is that we've reached the end of the road.
Now peering directly over the fiscal cliff.
There's a lot of alarm about what Trump is doing, and he's certainly effectively using new techniques to do it.
The phenomenon of so-called fake news.
It was right, there was nothing illegal about it, nothing immoral about it, and it was in the best interest of the people of the state.
We remember John McKeithen, Louisiana's 49th governor.
Hi everyone, I'm Andre Morrow. Much more on those stories in a minute, but right now on SWI, we are tracking Alberto. Alberto is the hurricane season's first named storm with winds about 40 miles per hour. It's labeled a subtropical storm at the moment, heading toward the upper Gulf Coast. So advisories will go up from southeast Louisiana to the Florida Panhandle. Winds forecast to reach 65 miles an hour. A lot of travel plans this Memorial Day weekend, so keep close to reports about Alberto as it advances. Now let's look at some of the other stories making news this week.
LSU football legend Billy Cannon, the only Tiger to win the Heisman Trophy, died Sunday morning. Cannon won the Heisman a year after leading LSU to its first national championship in 1958. The Maravich Assembly Center on LSU's campus hosted a public visitation and funeral Wednesday. Cannon is best remembered for his punt return against Ole Miss on Halloween night, 1959.
Billy Cannon watches it bounce. He takes it on his own 11. He comes back upfield at the 15, stumbles momentarily. He's at the 20, running hard at the 25, gets away from one man to 30, still runs at 25, at the 35 to 25. He's down to 50, he's in the clip, 45, 40. In the 10 to 5, he scored!
Number 1 ranked LSU won the game 7-3. Cannon became a dentist after starring for 11 seasons in professional football. In 1983, though, his world came crashing down when he went to prison for counterfeiting. He served 2.5 years in federal prison. Some years later, he was given the job as prison dentist at Angola State Penitentiary and remained there until his death. LSU retired his jersey number in 1960, and the College Football Hall of Fame inducted him in 2008. A statue of Cannon is planned for LSU's campus. The great Billy Cannon was 80 years old. New Orleans was selected to host Super Bowl 58 in 2024. A delegation led by Saints owner Gayle Benson presented a proposal to NFL owners in Atlanta this week. The Big Easy last hosted the game in 2013 and has hosted the Super Bowl 10 times. Iberia Bank, the largest bank headquartered in our state, is shutting down or consolidating 22 of its branches. NOLA.com reports the closures include 7 branches in Louisiana. The closures should be finished by the end of the third quarter of this year, and the company expects to earn back the $12 million in costs to close the branches within 2 years.
Well, the governor changed things up a bit to kick off this second special session of 2018. Instead of addressing lawmakers at the Capitol, he chose a renovated gymnasium on a college campus and directed his words to the people of Louisiana.
In a packed gym on the campus of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, the signs were all around an energetic Governor John Bel Edwards. Video boards flanked him on stage urging, "Fight for our people, fight for our state."
What makes this special session different is that we've reached the end of the road. This is it. On June 30th, $1.4 billion in temporary revenue that has been funding all of those critical priorities goes away. It will be gone.
The job is to find the money to cover the $648 million shortfall that will remain.
Because it's your health care. It's your hospitals. It's your loved ones who are on waivers or in nursing homes. It's the food on your table. It's your TOPS, your college education.
He may have chosen Lafayette to deliver his message because it could see cuts to the UL campus, to a community technical college, and to Lafayette General Hospital.
Come July 1st, if we don't fix this problem, our partner hospital here in Lafayette may close. And whether you're in Lake Charles, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Bogalusa, Alexandria, Shreveport, or Monroe, our partner hospitals that have already faced cuts 2 years in a row would be forced to close should we not maintain adequate funding for them.
He told listeners when a hospital closes, it doesn't hurt just the poor or uninsured, but everyone in a community. The governor also bemoaned the loss of college students because of the uncertainty to TOPS.
Sadly, some of our best and brightest have decided that they could not risk that scenario and reluctantly accepted scholarships from schools out of state. And I don't know if we'll ever be able to get them back. But I can tell you that I, for one, am going to fight like hell to try to get them back to Louisiana.
Edwards wants the legislature to renew half of the taxes that will expire. That would make the state sales tax 4.5%. He's also calling to eliminate more than 100 tax exemptions and credits. Doing that, he says, would fully fund state partner hospitals, LSU Health Shreveport, TOPS, and Medicaid. He says it would also result in a $400 million tax cut for the state.
This isn't about me. This is about all of us. This is about our Louisiana.
Now, this afternoon, the legislature has already started considering some tax policies, and they will continue to do so next week. We will, of course, be following what they do. Yes, he was the 49th governor of Louisiana, and he would have celebrated his 100th birthday next Monday, Memorial Day, May 28th. Kelly Spires took a dive into LPB's archives to learn more about the man behind that slogan, "Won't you help me?" John McKeithen. What'd you find?
Thank you, Andre. That's right. John McKeithen was only the second governor in Louisiana history to serve 8 consecutive years in office. He's known for ushering the state out of longism and into the modern era.
I, John J. McKeithen.
John McKeithen took office as governor in 1964. He brought with him experience as a state representative, public service commissioner, and soldier. In 1945, he opened a law practice in Columbia, not far from his native Grayson. 3 years later, he was elected to the state house. As Governor Earl Long's floor leader, McKeithen studied Louisiana politics. He was elected to Huey Long's old public service seat in '54 and again in '60.
He virtually took that Long family from the Longs, and it gave him tremendous credentials with the Long faction, which was still substantial in Louisiana.
Part of the Long path to success was unifying blacks and poor whites. McKeithen distinguished himself among Southern governors for easing racial tension rather than intensifying strife. He called out the Louisiana National Guard to protect civil rights marchers on their way from Bogalusa to Baton Rouge.
There had not been a single black person through the front door of the governor's mansion for over 100 years until I became governor. And we were staged for some real serious things here. And I take pride, very frankly, in doing the job that I think we all did in keeping as much peace here as we did.
In 2016, the FBI revealed McKeithen had paid off white supremacists and black protest groups to keep the peace. McKeithen was also friendly with segregationists at the time, including the controversial judge from Plaquemines Parish, Leander Perez. McKeithen oversaw rebuilding after Hurricane Betsy.
Plaquemines Parish was destroyed. I mean destroyed. There wasn't a thing there. And I said, Judge, it's terrible. It's horrible what you've lost here. He said, yes, it is, but he said, I will live long enough to build it back.
And McKeithen tried to clean up Louisiana's politics. He enacted a code of ethics and a board to enforce it. He helped end the patronage system by eliminating many appointed positions, and he worked to attract modern industry.
John McKeithen really went to Chicago, to Philadelphia, to any major city to encourage and industry to locate here, and they did. We had a tremendous boom in the period from 64 to 72.
More jobs and better wages made McKeithen an exceptionally popular leader. So popular, in fact, the voters amended the Constitution to allow a governor to hold a second consecutive term. Though McKeithen says that wasn't his idea. He returned to office with 82% of the popular vote.
I'm not a man who views government as a necessary evil. I view it as a positive force.
Facing tall opposition, McKeithen sold the state on the idea of building a stadium in New Orleans so big they would call it the Superdome.
I was determined that it was right, there was nothing illegal about it, nothing immoral about it, and it was in the best interest of the people of the state.
In his second term, McKeithen reformed the corrections department and improved conditions at Angola. He developed state employee insurance benefits, greatly expanded our system of highways and universities, and passed the taxes to pay for it. John McKeithen lowered the curtain on some of the last vestiges of longism and secured for the state a new level of prosperity. Louisiana Public Broadcasting honored McKeithen as a Louisiana legend in 1998. He passed away a year later in 1999 at the age of 80.
Kelly, thanks so much for that. And remember, you can always find more history online with LPB's Louisiana Digital Media Archives at ladigitalmedia.org. The U.S. Supreme Court last week issued a decision on a case that originated in Louisiana. Kelly sat down with a criminal procedure specialist at Southern University's Law Center to work out the details in the case. What did you find on this?
Yes, Andre. Yes, the Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision in favor of Robert McCoy, overturning the Bossier City man's death sentence and granting him a new trial. In his first trial, his attorney strategically conceded his guilt to the court against McCoy's wishes. We spoke with law professor Russell Jones about why this case is important. The United States Constitution outlines rights everyone in the country should have if they are charged with a crime. In the case of McCoy versus Louisiana, the Supreme Court clarified those rights. Russell Jones is a Southern University Law Center professor who specializes in the procedure surrounding criminal trials. Why is this case important?
The case is important because it deals specifically with the Sixth Amendment and the person's right of whether to plead innocent or guilty to a particular case.
The Sixth Amendment to the Constitution guarantees the right to assistance of counsel. But what does assistance mean?
Assistance of counsel means that the counsel has the right to determine basically objective of the case, that is, innocence and guilt, and or is that left to the defendant?
What happened in this case?
The defendant was accused of killing his family, his mother-in-law, his father-in-law, and his wife's son.
A man named Larry English was Robert McCoy's attorney.
English suggested to him that the evidence was overwhelming against him and that he should enter a plea of guilty and focus on the sentencing phase, that is, to not receive the death penalty.
But McCoy maintained his innocence. He says he believes his family was killed in a drug ring conspiracy, even though the evidence puts him at the scene of the crime. Since McCoy and his attorney disagreed, English asked to be removed from the case. The judge said no.
When English did try to concede his innocence, McCoy always objected.
And what did the opinion say?
It's totally within the authority of the defendant to determine what he will plead, and that the counsel cannot, over the objection of the defendant, enter a plea of guilt or concede to his guilt at any time during the trial.
What does the Sixth Amendment lay out as far as the rights of the defendant and the role of the attorney?
Under the right to assistance of counsel comes with it the person's right to be a counsel for himself. It has always been, historically, the person has a right to reject counsel if he chooses. But even if he accepts counsels, he doesn't give up all of his rights. He has the right to determine what the plea would be, whether I'm going to plead guilty or not guilty. He has the right to determine whether I will forego appeal if he loses at the trial court. He has the right to determine whether he's going to testify, which many people suggest that the defendant not testify, which is a good suggestion. He also has the right to determine whether he's going to go with a jury trial or not. And so those are rights that are totally within the discretion of the defendant. However, the attorney, under the Sixth Amendment, under the trial court rules also, has the duty to determine trial management.
It seems like in a trial like this that the goal of any defendant would be to not be found guilty, but the goal of a defendant is a little bit different in this case.
Here in this trial, the objective was based on the fact that McCoy was not willing to plead guilty to killing his family. He continuously said, "I never killed my family." And so anything that's contrary to the objective, the attorney cannot allege or the attorney cannot use in a strategy.
What should an attorney have done here?
The client was not following his instructions or his counsel, and that's the most difficult client to deal with, the one who will not follow your instructions. The question became an ethical issue here when he decides that there's no way that we can win the case, and whether I would present this defense that the defendant has given me when I know that the evidence does not substantiate or does not verify this particular defense. And looking at Louisiana Ethical Code and also the Model Penal Code for Ethics, when it talks about being a part of perjury or placing false evidence before the court, it actually talks about the defendant knows that the conduct that he's engaging in or has been requested to engage in by his client is criminal or fraudulent, and that he knows that the evidence that will be presented to the court is false. Here, he truly believed that it was false, but it's interesting that it seems as if McCoy believed that he was telling the truth.
For McCoy, the opinion means a new trial and a new attorney.
It will be interesting how a new attorney will present it. I somewhat agree with English that, again, saving his life would have been my ultimate goal.
Another interesting element of this case is that Louisiana's rules regarding being innocent by reason of insanity are different than many other states, but that didn't affect the core of this case regarding the Sixth Amendment.
All right, Kelly, thanks so much for that information.
How do President Donald Trump's attacks on the media compare to the criticisms of political leaders that came before him? And why social media may not be the best source for news? Those are some of the topics covered on this month's Louisiana Public Square. Here's a condensed version of the program, News About the News.
My question was just, in the age of the Trump presidency, how has Trump differed from, former politicians like, for instance, Huey Long and Earl Long when it comes to attacking the press? Like, I know Huey and Earl Long attacked the Times-Picayune. Way back in the day, I read the Earl of Louisiana, and he seemed to be a pretty vocal critic of the Times-Picayune then. But just, how have things changed and how is Trump different?
I'm glad you asked that question because I think it's a great question. I would say there's a lot of alarm about what Trump is doing, and he's certainly effectively using new techniques to do it. But I don't see it as fundamentally different from what Richard Nixon did when I was young, and it's not fundamentally different from what the Longs did, and the truth is that eventually. Richard Nixon, in a way the media beat Richard Nixon. And in a way Richard Nixon exploded himself by dint of his contempt for that. And so I'm less worried than people, I think, generally in the media are about what Donald Trump is doing.
I would take a slightly different tack. I think all of this is what you're talking about, whether it's the Longs or whether it's Trump, or even Nixon to a lesser degree. It's a wave of populism, and we've had this in the country a lot. You could argue that Bernie Sanders himself was a different form of populism, and it has always been interesting or advantageous to tilt against establishment folks, establishment and institutions like the media. I think what is dangerous with Trump is that he has taken on a level of criticism about First Amendment freedoms, about press freedoms, about the right for reporters to ask questions, and that kind of antagonism or opposition to the press, even so far as it aids to refer to the press as the enemy of the people, is very dangerous.
And just today at an EPA event with Scott Pruitt, the AP and CNN were barred entry. That is more problematic, I think, than any fake news proclamation coming from the president. When you have reporters trying to do their job, trying to get information to the people, and there are armed security saying that they cannot come to hear what a cabinet official has to say.
We have these major platforms now that are in charge of a lot of our media information. So you're talking about Microsoft and Google and Facebook, and these are not companies that have news values as part of their mission statement. You know, they're in the business of making profits and selling products and those kinds of things. So their objectives are different than traditional news organizations. So the fact that more and more people are getting their news from these platforms creates an inherent conflict, and it's something that we're going to have to pay attention to.
You can catch a repeat of News About the News this Sunday morning at 11 on LPB, or watch it online at lpb.org/publicsquare. Now, a look at what some Louisiana fishermen are doing to help save our state's coast. Disparaître, which is French for to disappear, is a film by videographer-producer Bill Rodman. It showcases what these anglers are doing. What can they do? Take a look.
You know it's the most amazing place you've ever seen. I call it the watery Serengeti.
Strip, there you go.
While this fishery is the most prolific anywhere around that I've ever seen in my fishing experience,
Rebound, good recovery.
I've also started to notice that there's been some changes, and they're not changes for the better. A football field an hour, 1,300 acres of land a year are lost back to the ocean. We're losing this land at such an alarming rate that I don't know that we will be able to sustain this fishery for more than another 50 years.
The old plop and drop.
We really are in a desperate situation. And I'm telling myself, I can't just sit by and watch this place disappear.
I just got a feeling we're gonna see ourselves a little orange sherbet fish up in here.
Oh yeah, nothing like some old red dessert.
So I'm Captain Lucas Bissett. I'm a fly fishing guide here in the state of Louisiana. I've been doing that for 6 years now.
Oh, how about the old ancillary? How about the old accidental redfish catch?
This year, I'm actually been awarded the 2017 Orvis Endorsed Guide of the Year. Wasn't necessarily naturally something I thought I would do from a young age, but now that I'm in it, I feel like I'm a natural.
Got a redfish over here on the left side, on the other side of this hump of grass here at 11. Yep, see him, broadside. Shot. Strip that.
I would say he's a little bit angry.
He's angry. So angry.
Ooh.
Finger burner.
Finger burn.
I mean, you're talking about Louisiana being the redfish capital of the world. That is not a moniker that is given lightly. What that means is that you are getting more opportunities at any given moment.
Literally just sitting here. Like, I wasn't even fishing. My fly was just sitting in the water and caught a fish. That's sad. So we're out here at Comfort Island. This is an area that I've seen just in the last year. I've seen a disappearance of all the land that was holding it in and making it a bowl. Now it's an open flat. You know, this is the problem that we're seeing, is that once you lose sort of that barrier area that's protecting a spot, you end up losing it exponentially faster than you would have before.
Our marshes in Louisiana were built by the sediment that came from the Mississippi River. So once that river was leveed in the 20s, the flow of sediment into our marshes stopped. So at that point, our marshes started to deteriorate and sink. We'd get less and less habitat, less and less areas for fish and crabs and shrimp to live, to grow, to reproduce, and therefore it'll eventually have a devastating effect on our fisheries.
I went out and I just had this idea. It was literally just an idea. I thought to myself, if I could find a way to get a black mangrove, which is a native plant of Louisiana, it makes a really dense root system, and so it can help with shoreline stabilization, and I personally would go plant them myself. And before I knew it, it became this multi-entity, you know, across the board from public to private sector, really experiment at first, and now it's become a project. It's a multi-year project where we're going out, we're planting these black mangroves, we're collecting the seeds from the native stands that are already out there, and we're having kids at a local high school grow the seedlings for the next year's planting.
Ooh, he gonna eat that. He ain't gonna eat that.
That should have been an eat. That was like on his mustache.
The reason that I am so passionate, the reason that I am so focused on making this a better place, it's not something that I want to do. It's something that I have to do. And that sort of drive is what's kept me hyper-focused on making sure that the coast of Louisiana and the fishery that I call home, the place that I make a living, stays the way it is now, or even is better for the future, because my kids and grandkids deserve the opportunity to have the same fishery that I have now.
The film will be screened at the State of the Coast Conference, that's in New Orleans, May 31st. And everyone, that is our show for this week. For everyone at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Morrow. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, that's the state we're in.
Support comes from
Entergy provides much more than power. We support science and engineering at local schools to build a brighter path to better jobs and help prepare the next generation. Because together, we power life. Entergy.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.